The president pushes for new bank regulations on Wall Street. Next week, a critical vote in the United States Senate. Will there be compromises? We asked the Senate Banking Committee's Mark Warner of Virginia.
From Bloomberg Television, the business of politics and the politics of money. This is Political Capital.
And we begin the program with one of the key negotiators of financial regulation, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. Senator, thank you for being with us.
Al, thanks for having me.
There is a disconnect between the fiery rhetoric on this financial regulatory bill and talks of a deal. When do you think the Senate will actually pass a measure, and how many Republicans will vote for it?
Well, this coming Monday, we're going to have a kind of the first test vote to see if we can proceed to the bill. You know, I'm hopeful that we may have a deal even before that first vote. I think at the end of the day, it's awful hard 18 months after the meltdown not to be in favor of financial reform. So I think there's still a high probability, I'd say north of 80% that we get a bipartisan deal.
And with a number of Republicans.
And I don't think this will be one of those, 1, 2, or 3.
Right.
I think it'll either be 25 or, we'll be scraping at the edges again in a partisanship.
You strongly disagree with the Republican assertions that the resolution fund you and Senator Corker crafted would lead to more bailouts, but it's become a controversy. Could you live with a bill that instead has an industry pay-in after any resolution or dissolution?
Sure, I could. I mean, matter of fact, Senator Corker and I originally said, let's just put up an even smaller amount, $25 billion, rather than Senator Dodd move to 50. Remember, what we've said is we want to make sure that these firms, if they go to resolution, that they're going to go out of business. But to make sure they go out of business in an orderly way where they don't disrupt the whole system, you got to keep the lights on.
So wouldn't the after the fact, wouldn't that be the
Republicans? Our concern was, and we actually thought about this, if we went to zero and had it funded afterwards, you'd be accused, well, the Treasury could borrow money, but you potentially have taxpayer exposure. Even when we've put together the pre-funded opportunity, which is pre-funded by the industry, there still would be a recoupment from those firms that actually benefited the most from the resolution after the fact. So pre or post is not really that important at the end of the day, as long as you make sure that whatever dollars are used will ultimately be paid for by the industry, and that those funds will only be used as debtor in possession financing, top of the food chain in terms of the capital structure, and be used simply to put the firm out of business. But to kind of prejudge before we see what the definitions are, to me, puts the cart before the horse.
Community banks. A number say that they want the Federal Reserve rather than the FDIC to be their oversee. Which way is it going to go?
I have to tell you, this is one where both Senator Dodd and I started with maybe the right, in a perfect world solution. Let's go back to a single banking regulator. Why have different regulators based upon charter? Well, we've been chopped away. We gave the state banks back to the FDIC, national banks to the OCC, the larger institutions to the Fed. Now, some of the smaller banks that have been regulated by the Fed in the past would say, no, we want to keep the Fed. End of the day,
so what we end up doing?
Is it something you're going to fall on your sword on? Probably not. But the notion of regulatory arbitrage that did take place in the last crisis, the more we can eliminate that, the better.
Let me ask you about derivatives. The Senate Agriculture Committee, as you know, has adopted a pretty tough provision, require banks to shed their swaps desk. Do you support this, and will it pass the Senate?
Well, listen, there's two things on derivatives we've got to look at. One is we all agree that if you're a normal industrial company or manufacturing company, you ought to be able to use these derivatives to appropriately hedge. The question is, how do you draw an exemption that's not abused? And candidly, the agriculture bill doesn't do as well, I think, as the Dodd bill on that. The other is, how do we make sure there's more transparency to all these transactions? And what Senator Ag has done has said, let's require a bank to either shed this whole activity and force a lot onto the exchange. The problem is it's hard to get all of these contracts.
Can you compromise with Dodd?
I think there's a way to get to a middle ground. What I've been looking at is there a way to say to the industry, okay, whether it's end user exemption, you say it's only going to be small, or we can get most of these onto an exchange. Let's take the industry at their word, and then if we end up writing the best rules possible and then we see 90% are using the exemption, you'd have some kind of tripwire that might then say the bank has to shed this activity if it exceeds a certain percentage using this exemption or not getting cleared or not being put on an exchange. So try to not, again, presuppose where you're going to end up, put the best rule in place, but realize the chances are Wall Street's going to figure out a way around the rule and have some kind of tripwire.
Let me ask you about Goldman Sachs.
Sure.
Is the company being unfairly vilified or legitimately scrutinized?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. I think the SEC has gone about their investigation. I sure as heck didn't know about any investigation ahead of the fact.
You don't think it was politically?
I don't. I think that I think these things have usually are worked on for a long period of time. I don't think that, there's any single institution that's been, there's no clean hands across the board here, but I think we ought to play that out, and I don't think we ought to take out, too much populist angst on any particular institution.
You're reading about people giving back Goldman money now. Obama got over almost $1 million last time. I think you've gotten about 17,000 last 3 cycles. Should politicians give back the money?
Well, listen, I think that, I've tried, and whenever I've had some dollars come in from financial institutions, during this period, I've tried to give it back because I just, during the period when you're trying to write the rules, you got to be extra careful.
You're going to be in Virginia this weekend with constituents talking about, and you're going to be asked about this bill. What are you going to tell them are say the 2 things that will make it less likely there'll be a crisis again if this bill were to pass?
What we're saying is we want to prevent crisis. So we're saying to these large institutions, we're going to require you to have more capital reserves. We're not going to allow you to off-balance sheet leverage up to levels that have been unprecedented. We're going to require a whole new series of capital that if you get in trouble will convert from debt to equity. And we're going to ask you, if you're a big institution, we're going to demand that you show how you can unwind yourself through normal bankruptcy process. And if you can't get the regulator to approve that, we're not going to let you get that big. So we're going to put all these, again, speed bumps in the way of institutions of getting too big. And then if you do get in trouble, you're going out of business. We're going to make sure that never again will there be an institution that's too big to fail.
And do you think that the president in recent days has struck the right tone, or has he gone too far?
Well, listen, it's easy. The one thing guaranteed applause line you can get, whether you're talking to a teabagger crowd or a bunch of liberal bloggers, is, bashing Wall Street.
Right.
There's been some stuff that's gone on that shouldn't happen again. But I think kind of this broad brush ad hominem attack against everybody in the finance industry doesn't make any sense. I do wish the financial industry would, occasionally look themselves in the mirror a little bit and say, they got to understand that even though Wall Street's back, if you got, even in my state, 7.5% unemployment, there's a lot of folks that rightfully are kind of scratching their head saying, this doesn't seem right in their gut.
Senator Warner, you're going to have a busy week next week. Thank you so much for being with us.